So say we all.
Hello, and welcome to Galactica Actually, where we will be rewatching the brilliant and, in my opinion, nearly perfect TV series Battlestar Galactica. I am Jamie Smith, and one time I was Boomer for Halloween. Joining me is my co-host Diallo Jackson. Diallo,
hello?
Were you ever a Battlestar Galactica character for Halloween?
I never was a Battlestar Galactica character ever. I don't really dress up for Halloween very much. Maybe I was a Cylon, just walking around.
A secret Cylon?
Yeah, maybe that's what I was.
So we will be talking about the 2004 remake, which aired on Sci-Fi back when it was Sci-Fi and not Sci-Fi. I don't have any history with the original series. Do you?
I have a big history with the original series, actually. Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, that was it was everything. Like, so, you know, Star Wars had come out, and obviously Battlestar was, I think, a little bit trying to capitalize on that, but that was just like we lived and breathed and couldn't wait for every episode when it came on. It was like event TV for us. And, you know, as a kid, I didn't realize it was actually only on for one season. We kind of thought we had in our memory, it felt like it was on for like a long time, but actually only made it one season. And then they had Galactica 1980, which I knew definitely didn't last very long, but I have some distinct memories about that as well. And so, yeah, my relationship with the original show actually informs some of the like love and maybe understanding about some choices that I know some people like don't like in the remake, but we'll get to those down the road probably, but I have a lot to say about a few things. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And so what brought you to the remake? Just the nostalgia love of the original?
Yeah, we you know, my group of people I know, we were all looking forward to Battlestar Galactica. Again, it held such a high place in our minds. Actually, I remember going to Comic-Con in 2000, and Richard Hatch, he had been trying to relaunch Battlestar Galactica, and he showed like his version of a remake, and it was actually sort of like continuing the story from the original show. And then when they announced the new show, you know, it's kind of a little bit of a blow because we wanted to see, you know, how that story ended up. But, you know, we had curious anticipation for this new one. And I do remember, you know, being a little grumpy about a few things, but
shocking.
Yeah. But it was like, you know, overall it was thumbs up when even with the little bit of the grumpiness, I still had thumbs up when I liked the show. And they took, you know, from the miniseries, they you know, turned it up to 11 for the series, and as history, as we say, the rest of it.
I have a different way in. I did not watch the original. I didn't know really anything about it other than the name. And I did not start watching this show in the first season. I used to, when I lived in LA, every Friday night would go to our friend Sarah's house, and we would go out drinking. And one Friday I got there, and they refused to go out until Battlestar Galactica was over. And I was cranky about that. But I sat down and watched the episode, and probably by the first commercial, I was like, this is actually pretty good. And by the time the show was over, I was like, well, I need to watch this show. So I went out the next day and went to Target and bought the first season on DVD. The second season was currently airing, so I had to wait for that to actually come out on DVD so I could watch what I had missed. And I started watching it week to week after that point. And that episode that got me watching this show is considered the worst episode of the series.
Oh my God. Was it Black Market?
It absolutely was Black Market.
That's the one episode. I can't wait till we get there because I'm going to like complain about that one. I hated that episode.
Well, now when I watch it, I'm like, what the fuck is this episode? It has nothing to do with the rest of the series. Mm-hmm. But for me at the time, having no history and not having watched a season and a half or whatever of the show, I was just like, wow, this is really compelling. Mm-hmm. So it brought me in, even though now I'm like, how though? It's so bad.
Yeah. Well, like Bill Duke gave a great performance in that episode. So I give it that. And there's a lot to be said. But what I will say is because I used to listen to like the podcast that Ron Moore did like right after the episodes. And I remember him apologizing profusely for that episode.
It's like when Damon Lindelof apologizes for the lost episode where Jack gets his tattoos.
Yeah, it was so I felt so validated. I was like, okay, it wasn't just me. Because I just remember like, what the hell is this, but I could see, he talks about what they were trying to do, and I get it. But
from an outsider, it was just it was a dramatic episode. A lot of stuff happens. None of these people meant anything to me yet, but I was just drawn in and wanted to learn more about this world.
Yeah, I can't wait till we get there. But there's a lot of things that it's indicative of the approach to the show, and what they did in that episode was. There was a struggle they always had with Lee Adama, and they were just trying to do something, and that was their attempt in that episode. So,
and we'll get there. We have a lot.
Yeah, we'll definitely get there. Yeah. Can't wait till we get to Fat Lee.
Oh God. Oh, Fat Lee. I don't have any Comic-Con stories about Battlestar, but I do have a Dragon Con story. A few years ago, they had a Battlestar Galactica panel at Dragon Con here. And when I learned that, I was like, I'm going. That's it. I'm going. I got there super early so that I could get really good seats. I was right in the front. It was Michael Hogan and Tricia Helfer and James Callis. And the guy who plays... I don't know. I can't remember what his Cylon name is. He's the black guy. Why can't I think of the actor's name? Either?
It was funny. It was just because I actually saw him in the airport once.
But him and the girl who played Kat, the girl who played Ellen. Mm-hmm. So it was and Katie Sackhoff, who was late. She got stuck in traffic, and it was amazing, an amazing panel. And at the end of it, Michael Hogan led us all in a chant of So Say We All, and I just bawled my eyes out experiencing that. It was amazing. So I have a lot of love for this cast.
His name was Rick Worthy.
Worthy, yes.
Yeah. I saw him in the security line. I was going up to Vancouver actually, and he was. We were in the security line, and I would have just been
like, "He's a Cylon. He's a Cylon."
I was like, "Hey, I loved you in Battlestar, man," and he was like, "He goes, damn, you went way back," because it was like 2018, I think.
Yeah, I have a lot of pictures. I have some videos. It was cool to see them in person. It was really cool to see, like, Tricia Helfer really does look like that. Mm-hmm. She is flawless. But yeah,
Do not get me started.
I love this show. I'm so excited to cover it with you. I just want to sort of give some groundwork that this show's been off the air for, like, more than a decade. And we've both watched it multiple times. So this is not a no spoilers allowed kind of show.
You know what really struck me, just watching this again, was that it debuted 20 years ago, which makes me feel old.
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about that. What I will say is that what I'm excited to talk about is how we can look back at what was happening in the world when this came out. Like this show came out 2 years after 9/11, and it was very, very informed by 9/11 and what was going on with the war we were fighting at the time and still fighting to an extent, and how we can sort of see it through like how we felt at the time, and then through this distanced lens of how we haven't learned very much about what it means to be human, or celebrating our differences and not oppressing each other.
Yeah, I mean,
should be fun.
Yeah, and it's also a part of what the show's telling you, actually, and I think that's why it resonates the way it does.
Yeah,
it's like
even still to this day, like there are lessons we should be learning that we're not, or some of us haven't.
This all has happened before.
All this will happen before, and all of it will happen again. I say it a lot. So we'll be talking about the miniseries today, all 3 hours of it minus commercials. This aired over 2 nights on Sci-Fi. And, before I was watching it, so I don't know what that was like to experience in real time, but you could probably talk about that a little.
Yeah. And we looked forward to it, watched the first part, we talked about it. And then, watching the second part, I definitely was on board by then. Had some thoughts, and we can talk about it as we go through. But it was it was all thumbs up. And I only had a couple things that I was a little bit angsty about. But
was one of those things the fact that they made Starbuck a woman?
It wasn't that they made her a woman. I was actually okay with that piece. It actually was, for me, there were 2 black characters on the original, and one of them was Boomer, and they made her Sharon Valeri, and the other one was Colonel Ty. And so especially Boomer for me growing up, he and actually I think the actor's name is Richard Jefferson. I saw him at that same Comic-Con in 2000, and I actually walked up to him and I thanked him for being in the position he was in to be on that show at that time, because growing up, we didn't really have very many black characters, especially in sci-fi, for people of color to look up to. Mm-hmm. And so I thanked him just for, being in that space and being there. So it was a little disappointing to me that there wasn't that level of inclusion. When I look at the show, there aren't very many black people on it, to be honest. But it's so good, I don't hold that against it. And, the new Boomer is incredible. So the Starbuck part, I didn't care. I just wanted it to be good. I had some issues with her acting in the first season, but
she gets better over time. Grace Park.
Yeah.
I think this was maybe her first role. I'm not positive about that, but she was.
It was her most extensive role. I saw her in a couple small things before, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even Katie Sackhoff comes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
She really grows into her character and grows into her abilities. I think, to be honest, overall, if it's not Adama or Roslyn or really Colonel Ty, maybe even I think Aaron Douglas is pretty set in. He's very solid in his character from the start as Chief. Everybody else really had to grow.
I mean, I differ in opinion there, but I think I feel like almost everybody was kind of
James
there.
Callis. James Callis is pretty.
Yeah,
solid
like James
too.
Callis. I thought Lee. I don't know if you said Lee Adama, but I feel like
because I think Jamie Bamber gets better over time too.
yeah, I feel like that comes with the material he's given, but I actually feel like his craft was there. And when I realized later that he's actually English, blew my mind.
He's also in Band of Brothers. He has
Okay.
a pretty small role in Band of Brothers. He plays an American in that too. So
Okay.
yes, same. Like
Yeah.
I knew that most of the cast of Band of Brothers were British, but he had such a small role that I didn't realize that these were the same people until I watched Battlestar and then rewatched Band of Brothers, and I was like, oh shit, he's American in this too. Wait, but he's British? It's just shocking to me. He has no hints of his British accent.
Yeah, like none at all. But yeah, Starbuck definitely when I remember like when season 2 started, like we had come back from the hiatus, and I remember saying to my friend, "Wow, I feel like she took acting classes over the break.
Yeah.
She's a lot better from season 1 to season 2."
Yeah,
But
Katie
it was
Sackhoff
never
got a lot better.
Yeah, but it was never like a distraction, and I like a lot of it was like the way they chose to film it kind of lent itself to them not having to have these like thespian Shakespearean performances. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Obviously, for whatever reason, Boomer really resonated with me from the start, which is why I chose to dress up like her for Halloween. I want to just be clear, I was in no way appropriating any culture. I didn't darken my skin or even darken my hair. I just wore her clothes and got a dog tag. I actually ordered a dog tag online that was octagonal and said Boomer on it. And I just really always loved her and loved Athena. For whatever reason, that model of Cylon just really resonated with me. Mm-hmm. I named my car Hilo, and now when I got a new car, it is an upgrade. I now drive a Prius, and since that is a robot, her name is Athena.
that's awesome.
So yes, the show is very important to me.
I mean, I still, when I write now, I always say, like, thank the gods and, that kind of stuff. So it's even years later, it's what I do.
I say so,
Lords
say
of
we all quite a bit.
Yeah, or like, Lords of Cobol. I say, okay. Even to people that don't know what I'm talking about, I just, whatever. It's just what I do now, so.
All right, so the show starts out, I think the first episode, at least for the first half of it probably, is just really establishing. We're learning who our characters are. We're getting a feel for what's happening on the Galactica. It's being decommissioned and turned into a museum. And there's little things that you don't catch the first time that you catch later, like that they are not networked. And that doesn't sound like it would be important, but it turns out to be very important later. The stuff about using old technology, because when they fought the Cylons 40 years earlier, the Cylons kept being able to get into their technology, so they went backwards. So they have phones that have cords on them. And, just using older technology that the Cylons couldn't infiltrate. Which
I thought they did a great, the way that they conveyed all of that information was actually pretty brilliant, because they didn't have a bunch of separate scenes and lots of exposition to convey that information. It was around the motif of Starbuck jogging around the ship. And you got to see all of the players that were going to be involved, and side conversations, and even little character moments, and that was, so there was a feeling of movement, and it definitely let you kind of like get all the things that you needed to get set for what was going to be happening later.
Yeah. And you meet people that you don't know necessarily are going to matter, but end up doing, like Gata, and you see Ty, who's going off duty and starts drinking right away. You get Chief, who ends up being very important. Who else do we see on that jog? Callie.
We see Callie. We see.
Fucking.
I wrote
Callie.
down. Oh, I know. Yeah. It's such a, we'll talk about it, I guess, at some points. But her real life escapades have tainted her character in the show a little bit. But I actually really enjoyed the character for the time. But I know some people have issues with her. But
at first, Callie didn't bother me. Later, Callie bothered me.
Yeah. I wrote down, it was just funny for me. I wrote down not Kevin Dillon. So the character that was on the show, I didn't get the character's name because he's only in this episode, but he's like he works with Tyrell and Callie. And,
oh yeah, he dies.
Yeah, he dies. And I wrote down Kevin Dillon. I kept writing down Kevin Dillon, R.I.P.
We see Boomer and Hilo. Oh, is this when they're right? They are playing their game. Their card game.
They jump to the card game. You see a couple things that tie into the old show, which is Starbucks smoking the cigar, the little stogie, which is like a thing that the OG Starbucks did. And they established sort of the idea that the conflict between the characters again. It was like with Ty and Starbuck, like right off the bat, being sort of antagonistic. But it was interesting also to show that the XO was playing a card game with the rank and file. So
I did listen to the first episode of Battlestar Galactica today, which I listened to years ago, and I went back and listened to today. That's with Trisha Helfer and Mark Bernardin, who covered the show for Entertainment Weekly back then when he was a journalist. And she said that when Ty says "star buck 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 buck," that was an ad lib.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Michael Hogan added that, and they loved it, so they kept it.
They call that track, I think, on the soundtrack, they call it Starbuck Book, I think, for that piece, too, which is hilarious. Funny.
And so we see Ty doesn't like losing the game, so he kicks over a table, and Starbuck jumps up and punches him.
How's your wife?
How is your wife, Ty? Oh, God. Soon enough, we will know.
We will know.
But yeah, this really establishes, like, she's got a hot temper. He's got a hot temper. He immediately throws her in the brig, which keeps her out of the fight at first as well.
Saves her life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true, because she would have been in the original Vipers, the ones that lost power. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, in Caprica City, we meet Laura Roslin, who at this time is Secretary of Education, and she finds out she has breast cancer.
Yeah, we also see the Serenity from Firefly. Through the scene.
I've never noticed it, because I'm always watching Mary McDonnell, because she's so incredible always, that I can never take my eyes off her.
It kind of takes me out of it a little bit just to see it, but it's like right before it's the last ship to fly down, right before it like focuses on her.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is she a character in the original, Rosalind?
No, she's not. She's completely new. Although I do think that this character was stolen from my brain.
Was the character in your brain played by Mary McDonnell?
No, but this actually ties a little bit into sort of like the genesis and approach of Battlestar. But so I used to watch Voyager and was very frustrated with it often. And I actually came up with this concept of like, it would be cool. I actually even think I sent it into, like, I'm not saying anyone stole it from me, but I actually think I sent it into, like, you know, the studio or whatever. But it would be cool if they created a character that had an incurable disease, and that would create a feeling of suspense or, you know, threat, so that we would always, like, because they were just cruising through the Delta Quadrant and just chilling. And I was like, there's no conflict ever at all. And so when I saw them use that on this show, I was like, oh man, okay, I guess I was on the right track. So.
And you sent this to Voyager?
Yeah, I did.
Because Ron Moore worked on Voyager briefly.
Right. Yeah, I know. And it's actually like, there's two things I say. So like, I'm a big fan of like Star Trek Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek. And Voyager is my one that I despise in a lot of ways. Ron Moore worked on both of those, and he feels the same way about both of them. And I often say that Battlestar Galactica or Deep Space Nine is the spiritual successor to Battlestar Galactica in a lot of ways, because a lot of the things that they did on that show you can see on Battlestar, the way they have like a huge cast of recurring characters that come in and out, a lot of the political intrigue and that sort of stuff. But then you have Voyager, which he worked on, and he left because he was frustrated with the way that they were handling the show, which was they basically ignored the premise and they ignored like the reality of the situation that they were in. And he carried that frustration to fix over into Battlestar Galactica. That was part of the reason why I think they approached things the way that they did. But yeah, it's all, for me, it was all tied together. I do not think that they stole that from me, but,
well, the reason I asked was because I know people would send like spec scripts and whatever to shows, and a lot of times things that were in these spec scripts, which you give up the right to your script when you send in a spec, that could find its way, like an idea from a spec could find its way into a actual television show, and you just would never get credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, my character was just like an ensign, that it would just be like a recurring character. It was something that you would always like have to come back to. But anyways, it was just like the idea that they needed something more than just what they were doing on Voyager. And clearly, Ron Moore felt the same way.
Yeah.
Is all I'm saying.
So,
but yeah, she's an absolutely brand new character.
Mary McDonnell is one of those actors that she's a kind of actor that I love because everything she does feels natural. Every role she plays just feels like weighted and lived in. So this is the first time we see her, and we don't know this character. We don't know anything other than she's just been told she has cancer. But the way she plays her is so compelling that we just immediately care. And we know it's Mary McDonnell. Chances are she's in this. This is pre-Game of Thrones. We're not expecting the main people to get killed off anytime soon. So I figured this isn't going to be the only time she's not just in this for the miniseries. I'm sure I'm going to be spending more time with her. But she's just she's so spectacular in everything she does on this show. And even in these first few scenes where we're meeting her, she's got hardly any lines, and she's still just so compelling. She's amazing.
The way that they show her dealing with the diagnosis is, again, it's a way to show her character and how she handles adversity. So she doesn't get the news and starts bawling and crying. She just kind of like kind of bucks up a little bit and stays in the moment, and she's not pretending either. It's not like she's trying to be strong. It's just kind of like she just has this like, got to do what you got to do, and so that is how she handles what comes up next.
Yeah, I like how she's sort of underestimated later by a lot of people because she's the Secretary of Education. She becomes the president, but she does her job with such, even though this wasn't the job she wanted or asked for, it's the one she's given, and then she's like, okay, well then this is what needs to be done. We are going to save people. We are not going to abandon people. We're gonna do this, and just, you know, one after another, like, what's the next thing we need to take care of right now? And I really love that about her, that she sort of takes the reins when that responsibility is given to her. She doesn't ask for it. She doesn't go seeking it. She seems to be actively hoping that it doesn't fall on her.
Right.
But when it does, she's like, okay, then we're going to do this.
And she ends up being the one that they needed.
Yep.
Now, I don't think you watch football, but
I do.
So to anyone listening, she's like the Brock Purdy of Battlestar Galactica.
I will not take this Jimmy Garoppolo slander.
Hey, this is not Jimmy Garoppolo slander. I think the guy is incredibly good looking. I'm just saying.
He is incredibly good looking.
Yeah. Like, it's unnerving to even me, who has no impulse to like men whatsoever. But even I look at him, I'm like, this guy is he's so handsome. It's
I'm
unreal.
pretty sure he's the most handsome person who's ever played football.
Who's ever played, yeah.
And he should not be out there because he could damage that face.
He's not out there right now.
I know. I hope he's okay. I was watching, like, this is a sidebar, but I was watching the 49ers game last week, actively rooting for them because I actually really like the 49ers. And watching Brock Purdy play, I was like, Jimmy's not getting his job back.
Yeah, no, he's definitely
He's just not.
He's definitely.
So he can leave and go be a model and an actor and let us appreciate all he has to offer.
Yeah. But yeah, Brock Purdy was the last pick in the draft. He was the third string quarterback.
You know what?
Just never thought he was even going to say.
That happened with Tom Brady.
Yeah, and then he ends up like being the guy, and that's just like Rosalind
or Tom Brady,
or Tom Brady. Yeah.
All right, so moving on, we get to see our first view of number 6, Caprica 6. I guess she's not actually Caprica 6. Caprica 6 is the one that's in Baltar's head later.
No, so this actually is Caprica 6. The one in Baltar's head they call Head 6.
Oh, that's true.
Actually.
Yeah, that's true.
So
this is Caprica 6.
Model, yeah, she's the one that's kind of hailed as a hero later by the Cylons.
Right. So she kills a baby. You know, I think there's a little bit of, this is the first human baby I've ever seen. It's so fragile. Everyone's going to die soon. I would rather this little creature not have to suffer in that way, so I'm going to kill it now.
Yeah, the cool thing about that moment is when she's walking away, she looks sorrowful or sad.
She looks really sad.
And that's, you don't agree with what she did, but there's like this complexity to it. And again, I think it all ties into the motives for the Cylons and what they're doing, why they're doing what they're doing anyway, that we kind of discover as the show goes along.
And then we meet Gaius Baltar. Gaius fucking Baltar. Who I, many times between 2016 and 2020, compared Donald Trump to.
I mean, yeah, he definitely. I mean, I wouldn't even compare him to Donald Trump.
They're
actually,
not one-to-one, but whenever there was something just so supremely narcissistic, I was like, oh, like fucking Baltar over here, because I think James Callis gives an unparalleled performance in this show. He's so good everything he does is so good. But this character is so infuriating so much of the time. But on purpose. It was
a really bold choice by the showrunners, by Ron Moore, to like make Baltar this character. And I look at like the versions of all the characters on this new Battlestar, and this was the most, I think, risky of them all, because in the OG, he's straight up, bad guy, twirling mustache villain. He basically sells out humanity to the Cylons as well, but he's definitely like more, he directly does it, and he's more evil. But in the case of this Baltar, there's a lot more to it. And I think, again, we'll get to it way later. But in season 3, Lee Adama actually basically says all of those things.
Yeah.
That Baltar basically, he's just surviving. And that's the thing about Baltar, is he's a survivor. And he doesn't necessarily do what you like would want him to do, but he doesn't necessarily do bad things either. Like, there are some instances, but
he's always about self-preservation.
Yes,
it's his
always
motivating factor.
Yeah, always and ever.
Yes, and that's what Head 6 says to him later when she's like, they should map your brain, because and she calls him a survivor, but he's a self-interested survivor. He's not a survivor because he did anything to survive. She saves his life when the nuke goes off, and then Hilo saves his life. And he was contemplating taking the ticket from an old lady because he's a terrible person.
Yeah.
He's just the most... I have to give them credit for creating a character that is this narcissistic to this kind of level that I don't know that I've ever seen before or since in anything. He's the most self-interested person I've ever encountered.
And I wasn't necessarily on board with it at first. And I'm not saying I didn't like it, but because when you hear Baltar, you're like, as a original fan, you're like, oh, he's the bad guy. So the way that he comes off in this is completely different. And I think it really starts to work over time, and you start to see more of who he is. And I think that, the show starts to figure it out too a little bit, because there's some things that they tried and gave up on. But he becomes one of the most fascinating characters on the show.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we meet Lee. Good old Apollo.
Lee.
Oh, Lee.
Oh, Lee.
He's so angry right now, and he hates his dad. And I have complicated feelings about Lee. Not quite as complicated as the feelings I have about Jack Shephard from Lost, who I loved, then absolutely hated, then kind of came back around on. Mostly, Lee is just the kind of character that I have very little patience for a lot of the time. Because his stubbornness leads to not listening to another person's side. Which is interesting when he becomes a lawyer later. I find him fascinating. I never once hated Lee, but there were times where I was like, ugh, come on, man.
Well, he serves a very important role on the show, but I think that's why they had difficulty writing him over time, and they were always trying to change things up and have him do other things. But basically, he almost always did the right thing, whatever that thing is supposed to be that they're supposed to do. He was the one that would like be that guy, and if they didn't do it, he would call it out, right? So you could always count on him to be that. But the show lives in the space of actually like, what do you do when you can't do the right thing all the time?
Yeah.
And sometimes like the most expedient thing to do, the most heady thing, the most practical thing to do is different than the right thing. And they examine that often. And so that's why I think he ends up being that sort of like stubborn person that you're like, come on, dude, like we can't really do that in this moment. But like, if he wasn't the conscience of the show, then I think that they would have kind of lost their way.
That's probably true. And I think now that you say that, and me thinking about this and what I said about Jack Shephard, I'm a very, like, in my real life, I'm very black and white about things. Like, I know what's right, I know what's wrong. Oh my God, there's a really fat cat outside my window. I've never seen it before. Anyway, okay. I'm very, like, black and white about things. Like, I know right from wrong. I do not love gray areas. I like decisions and a direction. So maybe that's why I don't like characters like this, because I see too much of myself in them. Characters that I love are the ones who do exist in that gray and have to figure out the right thing to do. I'm never one that roots for the villain. There are villains I love, but they're never like, that's my guy. Like, they're never my absolute favorite because you're a bad person. You're not my favorite, but you're compelling or whatever. But like on Lost, it's Sawyer. Sawyer goes from being this horrible person to being the hero, or Jamie Lannister. Like, I love those kind of characters that you think they're one thing and they grow over time and they exist in that gray area where they have to figure things out and get to the place where Lee just lives and is annoying. Yeah. So maybe I just don't like myself. Maybe I'm just very annoying. But yeah, I think that kind of hit the nail when you said that about like he knows the right thing, and sometimes you can't achieve that right thing, and then what do? I think that's what's frustrating for me about him.
Yeah. The show does that. Again, this is way later, but the episode I always think is really interesting when they have the abortion debate or topic, and it's sort of like I don't know the word I'm looking for, like microcosm or whatever of what Lee Adama is, where you kind of like know what the right thing is, but there's a practical consideration to take into account. And that whole episode is about like, what do you do? And I mean, that's what the whole show is, like, what do you do in this situation? Yeah. So it's often an examination. So again, you need that guy there. Yep. To like kind of show you or establish what the right thing is supposed to do. And then you have to say, well, like, okay, but what should we do?
Or what can we do?
What can we do? Because the right thing might not be what helps us live to make it to tomorrow. Yeah. So, yeah.
Then we get the stuff with Boomer and Chief, where we established that they have a secret romance going on.
Secret lovers.
I think it's because she's his superior. Is that true?
Yeah, she's a lieutenant, and he's a knuckle dragger. So that's what they call him. Yeah, I think. So yeah, definitely not allowed by regulations, but it's it'll come up later.
Lots.
Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. I remember, like, I started watching this in season 2, so by that point I already knew that they knew she was a Cylon and that she had tried to, I was going to say spoilers, but we established at the beginning. There's no spoilers here. That she tries.
You come here, you've seen the show, or you've at least watched the episode before watching
this.
Like,
I can't remember where their story is, but I think by that point Hilo had already returned with Athena, and this Sharon Boomer had tried to assassinate Adama. So I already knew all of that. I don't know if I knew that she'd had a relationship with Chief or not. when I went back to watch season 1. So I thought it was interesting, especially since I'd seen that character with Hilo later.
One of the things about, again, the show is just so brilliant on lots of different levels, but it establishes their way of being on the ship before any of this happened. So it definitely was against regulations and everything, but everyone knew it was going on. Like, they were trying to be secretive, but even when they sneak off, Hilo gives this look like, oh, there they go again.
Yeah,
you know,
Hilo's aware.
Yeah, he's very aware, and he, you know, as they move forward, they talk like even more about his thoughts about it. But
do they? I don't remember, because it's been a while since I rewatched. The last time I rewatched this before rewatching these 2 episodes was pre-pandemic. I think back in like 2018 or 2019, I started rewatching the show. So it's been a while. Does Hilo?
Well, it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot about how he, like, where he ends up with her. He talks about his feelings about when they were hooking up. Yeah. So.
But does he talk about his feelings for her before?
No.
Okay. Because
he never talks about it before. No.
In the show Bible, it actually does establish that Hilo has feelings for Sharon. He just has never told her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think my memory, too, is that at least in one of the podcasts that Ron Moore did, I don't even think Hilo was supposed to make it past the miniseries, actually. I think the studio was like, we really like this guy, and so they brought him back, and
thank God.
They kind of established...
Because
he became one of the pillars of the show.
And I'm going to put Hilo outside of my he's a good guy, he always wants to do the right thing, so he annoys me bucket, because he's maybe the one character who has those traits that that I always was like, yes, Hilo, love him, listen to Hilo. For whatever reason, I don't know if it's the way that Tomo played him or just the character in general, but he's like very high up in my rankings. Obviously, I had said I named my car after him. Fun fact, my car was going to be named Anders, but when I met my car, I was like, no, it's definitely a Hilo.
It's funny, like, he is just as, like, do the right thing as Lee is.
He absolutely is.
But he's more vulnerable. He's a little softer.
Maybe
you could
that's
see
it.
Like, you could see the humanity in him, and I think that's why literally the studio was like, he was testing better, and they were just like, bring him back. Some a version of that happened. So
Trisha Helfer. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just like, he does something like. He does something in a much later episode where he does the right thing, and it drives me nuts. And I'm just like, you did the worst thing possible. The worst thing possible.
There could be a couple of those.
Yeah.
On the Battlestar Galactica podcast, Trisha Helfer was saying that Tomo Panicat is like just incredibly smart and warm and kind, and the fact that he's so handsome makes all of that stuff even more annoying because he looks the way that he does. But he's never like, she said he just has like no arrogance about him, which was so nice to hear, because I like him as an actor so much, and I love him on this show. And when I worked for a talent agency, I tried really, really hard to convince the agents that I worked for that they needed to try to find out who these people from Battlestar Galactica who were Canadian, if they had representation in the U.S., and if they didn't, we needed them. And Tomo was on my list, and they did not listen to me. But they should have. No, they shouldn't have, because that was a shitty agency. But at the time, I just really wanted to meet Tomo Panicat.
He probably, like, think about it. He, like, out of everybody on the show, he's probably like the most liked and loved and beloved character, I think. If I really think about it. Maybe, I mean...
Him and Starbuck, maybe.
Well, like, in a different way. Like, Starbuck is just kind of... Starbuck to me is like the Wolverine character. Or even like OG Starbuck. Like, you always like the rogue anti-hero type. Like, you just kind of like them. But I just mean sort of like... again, like, he does the right thing. He's the hero. He's well liked by almost everybody. Like, that's one of the things. Like, he doesn't really have a lot of conflict with any of the other characters at all. Like, he's the, everybody else has like they like one person, but then they bump heads with somebody else. And Hilo just was like friends with everyone.
Yeah, like the only time he has any kind of conflict with anyone is when he shows back up with Sharon, with Athena.
Right, and and it's sort of like it's because of his relationship with everybody that they kind of like give her any sort of chance.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah. Anyways, I think it's great.
Yeah. Then, let's see. We have this whole ceremony. We keep seeing this character, Doral, who is a PR person. He plays a big part later in the episodes. We meet Duala, who I loved and then absolutely did not. And then came back around on towards the end.
I actually wrote in my notes this scene. It's actually funny to me. I wrote, "Why is this show so woke?"
Why?
Jokingly. Because it was the whole, like, they established the same-sex bathroom.
Oh.
And I just feel like if this same show was made today, people would be like,
Yeah.
Why are you trying to put your agenda on us? But it's just like they were just showing a society that just kind of was a little bit different and practical. So
The actress who plays Duala is absolutely beautiful. Just have to throw that out there.
yeah, I wrote D. Hello, D. That's what I wrote in my notes.
What is her position? It says here she's a petty officer, but she's like communications?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what her role is, but yeah, she was always the one that was like, I mean, kind of like the Uhura of the ship. Like, she would always like, like you said, communications, and she'd also be relaying to people what they needed to be doing at certain times, like kind of whatever the commander said, she would kind of relay that back. So, yeah.
And what is Gata's role? What is his position?
Gata felt like he feels like operations, and he had like a little bit more of like he has like a middle manager type vibe to him, but he also was like responsible for doing the calculations for the jumps.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit more scientific, but not really 100% sure what his like tag was.
I would like to throw out there that I would love to see Alessandro Giuliani in more work. He's so good. Everybody on the show is so good. I don't like when they disappear, and I feel like I haven't seen him in anything in a while, and he should be working more because he's a very good actor.
Yeah, I think a lot of these, I mean, because, most of them were Canadian. I think a lot of them just kind of live on Canadian shows now, and that's why we don't really see them very often.
Yeah.
And they'll pop up in a movie every once in a while that happens to film in Canada as a background character. But I remember seeing him in Man of Steel.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw that movie, but I willfully do not remember anything about it.
Yeah. That was also 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
I know for a while, cursed Joss Whedon was really pulling from Battlestar to fill in roles in his shows. There were quite a few people from Battlestar that were in Dollhouse.
Yeah. Hilo.
Oh, yeah. But Jamie Bamber was on an episode. Michael Hogan was on an episode. So, yeah. I mean, I've seen some of these people pop up in things since, but I really wish that they were in more. There's stuff about I'm reading this recap thing about Adama having this perceived fear of computers that Rosalind sort of mocks him about that a little bit, and that's where we get the whole thing about the network computers, how they're not networked because they can't be integrated by Cylons. And, it's been 40 years, so everybody's like, oh my God, so long ago.
Not to make this a little too, but I think the show, again, why I think the show is so, it's such a parable about life, and it can be applied to so many different things. But I actually kind of see this in the whole like debate about vaccines and whatnot, because the people like myself and younger, we grew up in this environment where, like, I think vaccines are sort of like invisible to us. So we take we don't see the diseases anymore. So we're like, why do I need to do this? Right. But the people like my grandparents say, they had to actually deal with measles and polio and stuff. They were like, get your vaccines, because they knew what it could do. Right. And that's kind of like how Adama was. Like, he actually lived through this time where he had to deal with it. So that's why he was so adamant that he was not going to have his ship networked.
Yeah.
Even if it felt like that time was long past, he still was like, no. Whereas Rosalind, she saw the benefits that it could bring, but she never really experienced the downside of that to the degree that he did. So she was a lot softer on it.
Right.
But there was a reality in there where having them networked could be to their detriment. It seemed like a long shot to most people that didn't live through that stuff, but he was kind of still kept that pilot light burning with that idea.
Yeah, and there's this whole thing about Baltar and how he's basically like a computer scientist, and how his frame of mind is that, there's so much that we could do. And yes, we created the Cylons, they rebelled against us, blah, blah, but that was a long time ago, and there's no reason why advancement needs to stop because that happened. And,
right.
And so he, in his hubris, allows this beautiful woman access to the defense mainframe, which allows her to put this virus in that then allows the Cylons to swoop in and take out 12 colonies.
Right. In 30 minutes.
Which is wild. So here we are on this, the Battlestar Galactica was the first of the battleships. So it's the oldest one. It's not networked because Adama is very set in it's unnecessary. Why would we do that? We unnetworked when we were in the Cylon War. We're not doing that. The ship runs fine. We're not upgrading. And that ends up being a benefit. Just like all of those Vipers that are in the museum. Mm-hmm. They can still fly because they're not privy to this virus. So he's right. Even though I can see her side too. You're being so old-fashioned about this.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's one of the great things about the show, because it's very gray.
Yep.
Because, yeah, you could definitely see both sides to the equation. And, they actually would have been safe if Baltar hadn't have, been led down the path he was.
Well, they picked the right person who just needed to have his ego pumped a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Literally pumped.
Yeah. I heard it as it was coming out of my mouth, and I was like, well, it's too late now. There's this whole thing with Adama and Lee and how they haven't talked in 2 years because Lee's brother, Zach, died in a flight accident when he was still in flight school. Mm-hmm. Lee assumes that Adama pulled strings to get Zach to pass flight school, and Adama never corrects him on that, which I don't understand why.
I could be misinterpreting exactly what happened, but my take or read on it was that it wasn't so much that he pulled strings, although if he said that, please correct me. But I just read it more of the pressure that he put on his sons to go into service.
It's both, because he does say you use your connections to pass him through flight school.
Okay.
He never should have been in a plane. He was never good enough.
Yeah.
And we learned later that it was Kara who passed him because she was his flight instructor and she just loved him too much to fail him.
Yeah.
And he died.
And just a little throwback to the OG. There was their brother Zach was he was a pilot as well. He was one of the first ones to die, and when the Cylons attack, he flies out there and gets killed, and that kind of like motivates both Adama, Apollo, and his sister was Athena actually on the original show. And also, Zach was played by Rick Springfield.
Really?
Yeah.
The Cylons attack after this decommissioning ceremony.
Quick, right before you get to the attack, I just like the one of the themes of the show actually is talked about when Adama gives his I call it like the Air Force One moment when he gives his speech and he goes off script.
Yeah.
And he talks about just basically what the show's going to be about. Like, we fought the Cylons, we beat the Cylons, but did we prove that we deserve to even exist still?
Yeah.
And the show just examines that constantly.
True. That's true. He gives so many speeches, I can't remember all of them.
It's true. It was like the first, like, it was like the moment. I think the show kind of like it turns after that, obviously, but it sort of like sets up what they're going to be kind of like looking at and dealing with, like here on out.
Yeah. So after the ceremony, Rosalind goes back to the ship that she came over on, and the Vipers are all out to do basically a flyby.
Mm-hmm.
And the Cylons attack. Six explains to Baltar that she may die, this body may die, but my consciousness is going to be downloaded into another exact copy of this body. I'll remember everything. And then she saves him when he would have died in the explosion. And that's when they get a call on the Galactica that the Cylons have attacked, which none of them thought they would hear again because the Cylons had disappeared for 40 years.
It's such a great scene too. It's very like quiet and still, which is again one of the things I love about the show. It like played it a lot differently than I guess you would kind of suspect because it's such a big moment, but it's just really Adama in his room getting the call, and he hangs it up, and he's kind of like, I think, hoping reality catches up to him or something, because he just can't quite process it just yet.
Yeah. So he informs the rest of the crew that these attacks have happened. They say that the Pycon fleet headquarters have been destroyed, and everybody should get ready for combat. They don't have a lot of, or any, ammunition. I think they don't have really any because they're being decommissioned. Ty is ordered to look up any munitions depots that they can get to. So yeah, they had no ammunition.
It's it's definitely the backbone of part 2 of this episode, is them getting munitions.
Starbuck is let out of the brig, but all of the Vipers are already out, right? So she doesn't even get into a Viper for a while because she ends up in one of the new or the old ones.
The old ones, yeah, and they had to go down to get them, right?
Yeah,
from the
out of the museum.
Out of the museum, yeah.
And there's something about one of the launch tubes, I think, or maybe it's one of the landing bays has been turned into the museum.
Yeah, they said it's a gift shop. Gift
shop, yeah.
So why can't we launch from here or whatever? Yeah, it's a gift shop now.
So they need to get all of these planes over to the one deck that they have to use.
Yeah. And then there's a whole, like, they talk about it and like briefly in the scene, but they're able to be operated, but they're not like, up to par. So they have to be worked on really quickly to actually be able to fly.
Yeah. So all the Vipers that are out, they all lose power. And before that happens, Dee starts getting reports about a lot of unusual equipment failures. Like even a Battlestar lost all power. Mm-hmm. So when we as the audience see these Vipers suddenly lose their power and then just start floating away, we kind of know, like, okay, here comes the Cylons.
Yeah, I wrote in my notes, R.I.P. CAG. That's when the CAG pieces out.
Yeah. And Boomer is the pilot of the Raptor, and I guess Raptors sort of, they fly alongside the Viper squadrons. I think they're like navigation or something. I don't really know exactly what the Raptors...
Yeah, they were like navigation and they were like tactical also. So they would kind of, and I think right before the battle, the CAG tells them to keep their distance.
Yeah.
So they're the one that they're kind of like relaying what's coming in and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And that's why they weren't right in the midst of the fight at the time.
Right. But they do get a little bit of damage. Hilo gets a not a horrible wound, but a wound from some debris that comes through. There's a hole blown through the floor of the Raptor, which he seals up. And they see that these, like, they have no contact with the Vipers, and they can see them all just sort of floating. So she ends up turning off their power so they just look like debris. Mm-hmm. And floating towards Caprica, because they're like 2 hours out or something.
Yeah, and obviously she learned that in Cylon espionage school.
Well, probably.
That was a joke, kind of.
She's still a sleeper agent right now. So when they get to Caprica City, it's basically like the planet has just been nuked by multiple bombs, and they eventually, I think it's in the second episode when all of the people come running towards them.
No, we're still in the first episode. I wrote in my notes, boxy exclamation points, because this was like in the OG show, there was a kid character that was created to resonate with children. So he was a pretty big part of the original show. So when you first see this character, he has the same haircut, like you're automatically, who he is, and they kind of reveal him a little bit later. But this is when he's shown and when he gets into the Raptor.
Right.
This is also when we first see Head 6. This is the very first time we see her.
Yeah.
After Baltar is actually on the ship and it's taking off, I think.
He sees her in the crowd.
Yeah, in the crowd, yeah.
But she doesn't talk to him until later.
Mm-hmm. This scene, to me, is when the show actually tells you what it's going to be. Like, not just the show, but the series. And really, it ends up being about, like, making hard choices. And you see the level of hard choices that they have to make consistently. There's a few more scenes in this episode and then the next in part 2 in the miniseries, but and throughout the show, again, it's just like kind of being thrown up against how do we do this. And in this instance, it's like, okay, we're on a mission, we need to get back. Hilo again, like we have to do the right thing. He's like, or no, actually, I think Boomer's the one that says that we can take a few people.
Yep. Well, she said they take
they
all the kids, and then she says we have room for 6 more, so we'll do a lottery.
Right. And then they get those people, and then you get to the great moment with with Baltar, like, and the woman that has the old woman that, I don't have my glasses. Could you read this? And it's the number they were calling out. And for a second, he was about to, like, you know, take her place. But then right in that moment, Mr. Hilo, who always does the right thing, recognizes Baltar and gives up his seat so that Baltar can go back to the Galactica, because he's, like, thinking, if this is the end of all things and this is the last bit of humanity, we're going to need the world's smartest man to go.
Yeah.
And so you go and I'll stay, which is that guy. That's why he's different than Lee, actually.
Yeah, because Lee would have been like, I'm too important. I need to help you navigate this ship.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the heart part of Hilo that we get. Like, he does the right thing, but he's a very heart-based person.
The funny thing in that scene with Baltar is he sees that when Hilo says, aren't you guys Baltar? He immediately is like, I wasn't doing anything.
Yeah, it's so great.
I wasn't going to steal her number. Absolutely not. Why would you think that?
Yeah. It's so good.
God. Guys.
The show, like, as dark, serious it is, it has some really good, like, smart comedic moments. Baltar is, like, the center of a lot of them, but there's a lot of stuff that happens every once in a while that's, like, great. Sometimes unintentionally funny, but still funny nonetheless. But
there's a really funny line in part 2 after Adama, like, realizes that Roslin was right about, if we're going to survive, we need to start having babies. He's looking at Billy and Dee, and he says, they need to start having babies. And Ty says, is that an order?
Yeah. It's so funny.
Oh, so good. What good writing. Okay, so on the Galactica, the hard choice they have to make is that they've been hit by the Cylons, and there's a fire. And if they don't vent it, the whole ship will burn. But if they do vent it, there's all these people in there who aren't going to be able to get out fast enough. So they're going to, Chief keeps saying there's 100 people down there. Mm-hmm. And Ty has to make the tough decision of, do I save 100 people and sacrifice the ship? Or do I sacrifice 100 people and save the ship? Mm-hmm. Which is a shitty position to be in, but the right decision is made. You have to save the ship. This is all we have.
The thing that I actually think is interesting about this, and as I've watched the scene over the years, I kind of understand it a little bit differently, where I actually think they could have taken more time and been okay. But this scene was about showing Ty step up finally. Because, like, prior to that, Adama is like, if you're the XO, you got to, like, be the XO. You, like, we're, like, fun and game time is over now, right? And then in that moment, Ty kind of doesn't know what to do, and he looks over to Adama, and then he kind of, like, the switch goes off, and he becomes, like, from that moment till he starts hearing music, he becomes the Ty that we all kind of, like, love, right? And one of the things I love about that, like, a little bit later, is that when Tyrell is, like, confronting Adama and saying, like, I just needed 40 seconds or whatever it was, I kind of read Adama's responses like, without saying as much, as like, you're right, we could have, but that's the choice the XO made. And I think he says, even if it was a stupid choice, I would have made the same one. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I don't know that in reality, Ty made the correct choice that, like, so he could have actually saved everybody, but he made the best choice that he could have made in that moment.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And that, again, it's one of the great things about the show is what do you do in those moments when you have to make a choice? There's hardly ever a right or wrong. But if he had have like waited too long, like I said, he could have like sacrificed the entire ship. So it's, and they play with this a little bit later in, season 2, actually, when the Cylons, like board the ship. But yeah, anyways, I actually like watching the scene again. I'm actually seeing how it's a lot more nuanced than I think it read initially when I watched it the first few times. So I will do this constantly to tell you how great I think this show is.
I think it's a sign of a good leader that Adama maybe would have made a different choice. Maybe would have taken that extra 40 seconds to try to get 50 of those 100 people to safety. Mm-hmm. But his exo made a choice. And it doesn't matter if the person lower down the chain agrees with it. I would have done the same thing. Like, that is the sign of a good leader, that you whether you agree or not, you support your second in command to the person who's questioning them. If he wants to turn around and address that with Ty later and say, hey, you jumped the gun on this, you could have waited, here's the reasons why, here's what we know, that's different. That's a private conversation. But you don't take the side of somebody who is subordinate to the XO with that person.
Yeah.
Because
even
it
if they're
undermines
quote,
the XO.
Quote, right. Yeah, exactly. Chain of command, all that stuff. It's great. It's good stuff.
I mean,
so military.
As somebody who manages a store, all I can think is if one of my baristas came to me and was like, the supervisor did this and blah, 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 I would automatically be like, they made the right decision with the information that they had. I would have done the same thing, because that shows that I support them when they are in the leadership position. It's not your place to question what you have been told to do or what they did. They did what they thought was the right thing, whether it was right or wrong. And then if it was wrong, then I can go to that supervisor and say, hey, so in this situation, you shouldn't have made that decision. Here's why. Why did you, or even ask them, why did you make that decision? Here's what I would have done. So next time, maybe think about it this way. Whatever. Like, you still want to support the people that are down the chain in command.
Yeah, there's two things I wrote in my notes of this part. I wrote, I like how Adama backed Saul's play. And the other part I wrote was, R.I.P. Kevin Dillon.
I could never even remember that guy anyway. So when Callie was cradling the burnt body, I was like, am I supposed to know who that is? Yeah.
It just looks so much like Kevin Dillon. It was like unsettling to me. Like, I just couldn't.
I'm sure
get over
Kevin Dillon appreciates all of these call outs, since nobody has talked about him since Entourage ended.
Yeah, right.
We get Rosalind getting sworn in by Alosha, who is this priestess. We've talked already about how Rosalind just, this wasn't what she asked for. It wasn't what she ever wanted, but it's what has fallen in her lap. So she takes that ball and runs with it, which is also the sign of a good leader.
Yeah, there's a scene like a little bit before this where she, when the pilot of the soon-to-be, what's the name of it?
It'll be Colonial One.
The soon-to-be Colonial One, when he gets the communique, and he's trying to read it and his hand's shaking. Yeah. And she grabs his hand and she's the one to steady it. Like, again, it's just like the amount of character that's conveyed in that moment without actually having them have to go through a whole bunch of dialogue about it. And it's kind of ironic because I a little bit earlier, she's like in the bathroom. She's the one that's shaky, dealing with her own personal stuff. But then when it comes to this, all of a sudden she's the one that grabs his hand and steadies him so that he can read the communique and get all the information about how everything's spiraling. And soon to be president.
I relate to her in that I will get all up in my head and anxious about stuff. I'm a very anxious person. I worry a lot. I come up with all kinds of scenarios, like worst case scenario for everything. I'm always worst case scenarioing everything. But when something has to be done and it is like, if it's, I don't want to say crisis because I don't think I've ever really been in an actual crisis, you know? But like when action has to be taken, I get very clear and very capable. And just, I jump into action really self-assured and confident, where inside I might still be like, fuck about everything. But I don't know what it is about like high pressure situations where I get very calm and able to operate really well. So when all of these little things where it seems like she's going to be a mess, and then when it comes down to it, she's the one that's got the steady hand. And I just really appreciate that because I don't know, I guess I see a little bit of myself in that. I'm not as cool as her. She's very cool. She gets sworn in, and on the Galactica, they have found a munitions depot to go to. And so Adama is like, all right, we are spooling up our FTL drives. We are jumping to these coordinates. And she's like, no, we're going to go around and save all of these people. And he's just like, the fuck is this guy? Like she's the Secretary of Education. No, thank you. This is a military operation. And so we get this like initial of them butting heads where it's like government versus military. And the episode ends with the Galactica preparing for their jump.
Well, it actually ends, I think, with an even more exclamation point.
Oh, right.
Where, because right in the midst of that scene, all of a sudden there's a
Cylon show up.
Cylon shows up. And this is actually a really cool scene, too, because Apollo gets dismissed by Rosalind because he's like, kind of like wants to do something. And so he asks to be excused, and he goes down to the cargo bay, starts fiddling with something. But meanwhile, on the ship, the Cylon approaches, shoots a missile, a nuke or whatever, and it appears that Colonial One is blown up. And that scene, in my notes, I write, first cry. Because Adama, like, faced with losing his son in the midst of all of like everything that's happened, like even before the episode started, like he already lost a son. Son comes back, the whole world's collapsing, and then personally losing his son so close. And the entire bridge crew is like looking on, and they all like have met Lee, and so they all get the impact it has. That scene is so powerful. And it's the first time that Edward James almost like shows like true emotion, and like he's a very stoic a lot, but in this moment, like he breaks.
Yeah.
And he gives his like Adama tears, I call them, where like his face could be sad, but they'll barely start leaking, and then he like gets it together really quickly. But that's like, he definitely is kind of like broken. It's such a great way to end a part one.
So
for sure.
What Lee did was there were these EMPs, these electromagnetic somethings, down in the cargo bay that were being taken back to Caprica. And he has the idea to set one of those off because it would derail the trajectory of the missile, I think. Mm-hmm. Or it would disrupt the missile. So this electromagnetic pulse is the word I was looking for, will shut down the ship, but it'll also shut down that missile. But what they see on their DRADIS, their radar, is this, what looks like a thermonuclear blast to them.
Right.
Because they're all retro. No satellites. Yeah. So yeah, that's why on the Galactica they think that Lee died.
Yeah.
And when we start the next episode, Chief tells Starbuck that Apollo died. And also that Boomer is missing.
Yeah, when we start part 2 of my notes, I just wrote the very start, because it basically starts right in that scene, and it's still him kind of like everyone's quiet and kind of like figuring out what they're going to do next, and kind of waiting on him, and he kind of gets it together, and prepare to jump and all that stuff. But I just wrote in my notes, this show is hard. And that's kind of like, that, again, it goes back to like having to make all the tough choices and everything. So in the midst of everything, he's just like, we still have a mission. We still got to like get these munitions and whatnot. So they have to often do these incredibly difficult things in the face of already difficult things.
So that's when they actually jump, right?
Yeah. And this is the very first jump. And they kind of talk about it, too, a little bit. I don't know how established this was, but I don't get the impression that they ever used their FTLs ever, like the entire fleet. They always kind of like went like in like Star Trek terms, it was like always under impulse speed. They talk about it a little bit earlier, where that to get to that station that they're talking about would take like 3 days or something like that, and that's why they make the choice to jump. But no one's really done it in a while, so they're relying on Gata to do the calculations, and it's a big question, even if they can make it or not. That first jump is actually a lot different than any of the other jumps that we see. I think it's the only time we actually see like what it looks and feels like for them inside.
Yeah, they do that Lord of the Rings widening while zooming kind of shot.
Yeah, yeah. That's the last time we see it. Every other time, it's just like the bright flash, and they go to the next spot. Yeah. It looks very effortless from here on out.
Right.
But in this moment, even Callie, she's like, oh, I hate this part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boomer is in the Raptor out in space, and she sends out a communications drone, hoping that a colonial ship will figure out where they are. Gaius is now he knows that there is a number 6 in his head. He sees her. Oh, he's still in the Raptor. I was thinking, like, when did he get on Colonial 1? But no, he's not there yet.
Yeah.
Then we learn that Lee and everybody survived because of what he did. And the Galactica ends up at this... What is it? It's some kind of... It's not quite a nebula, but just like some kind of storm. Yeah.
And... I think that through some stuff that comes up later, like later episodes, and actually in Blood and Chrome, the Blood and Chrome was the very last spinoff that Battlestar had, that showed the first Cylon War. But it actually answered this question. I actually always, there was like one thing I thought was like a stretch about this episode. We'll get to a little bit later. But Adama seemed to be a little quick to surmise that the Cylons were humans now. But there's a logic to why they placed this munitions depot in this storm. It's because I think that the colonial army already had suspicions that this was actually something that the Cylons were going to be doing. So they knew that it would possibly disrupt their machinery, and also it was a good place just to hide. They wouldn't be able to detect it there. So that's why it was in the midst of this hurricane or whatever it was.
Well, when we get into, because that happens very quickly after this, they dock with this station, and we meet Leoben. The first Leoben that we meet, and he's all messed up. And later, Adama says it's the radiation from the storm. It's messing with your silica, whatever. Science. So I'm guessing like there was no way for them to know that the Cylons were going to evolve into like human models, but because they're made of machinery, they knew that the radiation would affect the components of the, metal robot Cylons.
Right.
So when they meet Leoben, at first I don't think he suspects. It's later in that conversation when they get stuck and they have to look for a different pathway out. Like the things that Leoben is saying, I think, is what sparks for Adama that like, oh, I get what's happening now.
And so we're never gonna get there. So in Blood and Chrome, actually, Adama ends up like on his mission. It's like, I think it's his very first mission as a pilot, and he is on this planet and he sees like all of these experiments that the Cylons have been doing with humans. So he sees all these body parts and stuff, and it's just like, well, he's basically like WTF, right? So that's, to me, that sort of like answered why he would have even had that suspicion years later, because it, like, when you see the scene, you can tell like they're up to something, but he didn't know what it was at the time. But it involved like all these people, like, hanging and all this other stuff. It was pretty gruesome. But yeah, so that, because like I again, when I first watched the show, and even like all the way through, I was always like, yeah, that seems like a leap that he would think that, but they kind of answered it in Blood and Chrome anyway, so I'm okay with it. I was okay with it before. It's like, whatever, it's a show, but he kind of, I think, puts two and two together and then makes the leap there.
I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like this episode has less to like dig into. We can probably speed through it a little bit more because it's really more like big set pieces.
Yeah. I actually think I was talking to you about that a little bit earlier. Like the part 2 is a little bit more. There's a lot more minutia, I think. The first, the weights or the speed of the concept is in the first part, so definitely we can speed it along for sure.
So we get just to sort of illustrate that, suddenly Boomer has been found by Colonial One. We don't know how, there's no explanation, just I guess they got that beacon because she's suddenly on their ship. She's got all of these refugees with her. And they start going around finding survivors. They get a botanical cruiser, which looks really cool. Meet a little girl. This is pretty much the only part of this show that I was like, ugh. Is the stuff with the little girl. First of all, nothing against a child actor, but she's not a good child actor.
I actually think that I mean, I don't know. I think they played it that way on purpose. I don't think she was a great actress either, but they kind of like played up her. She mispronounced something. I wrote it down. Like it was such a mispronouncement of something. She called it Caprica City.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I caught that too.
Yeah.
Paprika. But yeah, there's this little girl, and she's like, "Oh, my parents are meeting us in Caprica City, and I'm with my grandparents." And then later on, they have to leave all of these ships that don't have FTL drives. One being the botanical cruiser. So we get this whole like scene of this little girl just playing with her doll while the Cylons are flying overhead, probably going to destroy them. And I'm reading this book called So Say We All, which is a unauthorized oral history of Battlestar Galactica. And they talk about how there was an executive at Sci-Fi who was like, no, you're not doing this scene with the little girl. You're not going to have the little girl go into an act break with us knowing that the Cylons are going to kill her. But then between when they were shooting and when that conversation happened, he no longer worked at Universal. And the person who took his place never mentioned that scene. So they're like, cool, we get to shoot the scene with the act out with the little girl. I just, call me heartless, I don't know. I just don't like that kind of visual manipulation. Like, I know I'm supposed to feel really bad because it's a kid. I feel just as bad if you showed me an adult sitting there. Like, it doesn't have to be a kid. It just feels really pandering for me, which is why that scene doesn't work for me.
I mean, I definitely could see it. Like with the way they set it up and with the music that they're playing, and there's a mechanical nature of even Rosalind in that scene where she's a little bit too like, just like, we gotta leave. I definitely can see that. I mean, I like to, like, I'm kind of like, do me, make me hurt. Like, I show me.
I'm not against being emotionally manipulated in the way that they are doing it. I just think it's really cheap to have it with a child because it's for lack of a better term, it feels really common. You could have a lot of people sitting around sort of enjoying themselves. Like, we're in a desperate situation, but we're on this beautiful ship with these trees and whatever. So they're like having a picnic or whatever, just living. And it has the same emotional resonance for me than having a child sitting there still by herself.
Yeah.
Where are her grandparents playing with a doll? Like, it just feels cheap.
So to me, it's sort of like, that is one of those unspoken off limits rules. Like, we don't, like, it's like don't harm children is often like a thing you don't, when you're watching a movie.
Why I think that one guy, that's why he was against it.
Right.
Like, no, you don't do this.
Right. And then, so that even if it might, to me, if it might feel pandering, it's more like they're just drawing a line in the sand of like what to expect on this show, basically. So, yeah, I agree with I agree with you in a lot of ways. Just how, like, for me, it's the flow of that sequence. It feels different than the rest of the show, actually. But I don't mind that instance at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So eventually, after they abandon some of their newly acquired fleet, they use their FTL drives. They end up outside of this storm, or they come in and they join with the Galactica. So everybody's sort of in the same place. Rosalind and Billy and everybody, whoever, come onto the Galactica. I think it's probably most of the people because it's a bigger ship. And Billy sees Dee and she runs up and kisses him, which seemed to throw him.
I wrote that's sexual assault.
Yeah, I mean, technically it is. Boomer sees Chief. What else happens? There's all these reunions. Lee lets Kara know that he's alive, but all the while, Adama is still sort of stuck down in this, whatever the munitions depot is, not a ship, with Leoben, and figures out that he's a Cylon, and they have a whole big fight thing, which I think you just kind of have to, I suppose, have a very slow-moving fight with the old man.
Yeah, I mean, that was another thing. It did seem like it was a bit of a stretch that, like, Adama would be able to, beat this guy. But I guess he was already, like, worn down enough that,
he
was believable.
He was being, decomposing from the inside. All of his little wires weren't connecting anymore.
Yeah.
It's got radiation poisoning.
Yeah. It's one of the few
Okay.
times in the show, actually, where they actually show a Cylon, like, the strength that they're capable of.
Yeah.
They don't really do it very often, but every once in a while they do it. They do it with Leoben in a few episodes later, actually. But for the most part, they always just seem to be just basically human. But every once in a while, like, they have extra strength and stuff, and he definitely does it here.
They do it with Caprica 6 against Starbuck later, too.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so there's this whole thing with them trying to make the audience understand how Edward James Olmos can be the father of Jamie Bamber. So Edward James Olmos, he suggested to wear blue contacts.
Yeah.
Jamie Bamber dyed his hair darker.
Mm-hmm.
I hate this decision.
Uh-huh.
I wish it had never happened. It bothers me every time they do a close-up on Adama's face.
Dude, it's so
because
funny.
It makes no sense.
It's so funny. I literally wrote, because I knew that all along, but and that I wrote in my notes that line, because like they had they had the close up and you see his blue contacts, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just think it's just as easily explained when you show the picture of them as children and you see that Zach has like the darker skin and the darker hair, and Lee was a little more light-skinned and blonde, and his wife was blonde. Like, genetics, it's fine. We can... It feels like treating the audience as stupid, which I know was not their intention, and I know Edward James almost made this choice, like, I'll just wear blue contacts, because Jamie Bamber, they were going to make him wear brown ones, which is an even worse decision. And he was like, no, I'll wear blue, it's fine, but I don't think it was necessary, and I wish they'd just been like, it'll be okay. If we say you're his dad, and people will believe it. We'll just make them believe it. It's a very small quibble. It makes it feel to me like we can't ever really see the depth of Edward James Olmos's eye acting, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Because the contacts are always sort of false. Well, there's always something a little synthetic about his eyes.
The funny thing for me was, like, I never noticed. I mean, I remember listening to, a podcast once, and I remember Ron Moore saying that, but it's something I never even knew. Like, I never noticed and never saw. This is the first time watching it that I actually saw it, and it was because I was watching it on sort of like modern today TV, like a big screen TV. Like, at the time, I was watching on a lot smaller screens, and I might even have like a CRT screen back when it first came on. When it first came on, I used to watch it like on my. I used to have a setup on my computer, and I watch it there. And the screen, but anyways, there was a lot of things I noticed, just like on a bigger screen now that I never noticed before. There's way earlier back in the when they were on Caprica, and it was in the scene where Six kills the little baby, and they're in that little water garden park that actually appears in a later episode. There's just like a quick scene of some kids running in the background, and they have like Cylon heads and they're playing. And like I never noticed that before, but it was just because my TV is way bigger now. So
yeah.
But anyways, that kind of has nothing to do with like the choice that they made. But I definitely agree what you said. Like it's sort of treating the audience like they're stupid or something. I don't know the words that you used.
Like we didn't need a shortcut or a shorthand to understand that this is his dad. Like,
yeah.
It's doubting that your audience is going to believe something, which I think executives do a lot. Mm-hmm. Maybe not creatives as much, but executives do. And I understand that, Eddie was like, "Nah, I got it. I'll do it. It's fine. You don't have to make him not have his blue eyes." Mm-hmm. I just don't think either one of them should have had to make that choice.
Yeah. The funny thing is Edward James Olmos's son, his actual son, actually appears on the show. And you don't even...
We actually represented him at my agency.
Did you? Oh, nice.
Was another reason why I was like, can we get some more Battlestar people? Yeah, because
okay.
we... Is his name Brody?
Yeah, Bodie Olmos.
Bodie.
Yeah.
Bodie Olmos, yeah. Because the agent that I worked for was really good friends with Edward James Olmos.
Oh, cool.
And so we represented Bodie. But that was, like, he was already on Battlestar when I started working there. Mm-hmm. He plays Hot Dog.
Yeah, Hot Dog. Yeah, and like you never... I mean,
never look at him and go, he looks strangely like Edward James Olmos.
Yeah, I would have never... when he first appeared, I didn't know he was...
Yeah.
That's who he was. And it was just through, like, listening and reading stuff. I was like, oh, that's his son. And I've actually... like, I do, when I was really into triathlons, he was doing them well, and I see him every once in a while, like, out there on the road or... getting ready to swim and stuff, and it's just like...
Is he tall? He looks tall.
No, he's on the shorter side.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think Eddie Olmos is only like 5'6" or 7", I think.
He looks short.
Yeah.
Bodie always looked tall. Maybe he was just next to short people.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, to me, tall is relative. Not that I'm the tallest person, but a lot of people are shorter than me.
I mean, I'm pretty short, but I have a fairly good eye of realizing like who's actually tall and who's not.
Yeah.
And he always just seemed tall to me. Like, I know that Tomo is really tall. I think he's like 6'3".
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he looks really tall. Mm-hmm. Whereas Jamie Bamber is like a tiny little elf man.
Right.
He's
yeah.
like Tom Cruise.
Yeah. I mean,
anyway.
I always assume every actor's short, so until I meet them, and then I'm like, oh.
So many of them are.
Yeah.
So the whole fleet, they're together, and the Cylons find them. Adama he gets back on the Galactica, and does he tell anybody right away? I don't remember. Does he tell anyone right away that they look like us now?
There's a scene when they're he's like getting medical care, and he tells Ty.
Tells Ty.
Yeah, and because it cuts from Baltar inferring it when he's having a conversation with Head 6, and then it cuts right to Ty saying the same thing. But so far, only those people know.
I skipped a whole thing. There's a whole thing with Baltar and Head 6 where he knows because she looks human, and she's basically like, anyone could be a Cylon. And she points out, like, there's that little device up there, it doesn't belong. And he just decides that it's got to be Doral, the PR guy, who is the Cylon.
Again, this is brilliant writing, actually. So I don't think that this goes back to like Baltar being the opportunistic person that he is. It wasn't that he, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't that he thought Doral was a Cylon. He just was like, I need to pin this on somebody else, and he is as good a person as any for me to do it. So it was very opportunistic, and as it turns out, he happened to be correct.
He picked somebody who was standing there, and I love that Six is like, well, I haven't seen him at any of our Cylon parties.
Uh-huh.
Which is also a lie, but we as an audience don't know it's a lie at this point.
Yeah.
And he's just like, okay, I'm going to say it's him. And I'm the one who is making this Cylon detector, and he just sets this guy up, and it's just a lucky shot.
I mean, it's great. It's so great because when they leave him, like, you're not sure, and you actually think that they just were like, yeah, he might be human or not.
He's really convincing.
Yeah.
And then I've read it wasn't I don't think it was the show Bible. It might have been the show Bible. Mm-hmm. That Doral, that particular one, also was a sleeper agent. He didn't know he wasn't human.
Oh, interesting.
So when he's fighting, it's because he believes it. Mm-hmm. He believes he's human. He doesn't know he's a Cylon. He's like Sharon. Mm-hmm. And I find that fascinating because I never read it that way. Once I knew he was a Cylon, I just always assumed that he was protesting because he was playing a part.
Yeah, me too. Like, I guess it's because the way he's protesting, like when you find out he's a Cylon, it's like, oh yeah, like if I were pretending to be... if I was pretending to be fake, I would fight that hard too, in a way. But it's the way that when he's sitting there at the very end and they come in, he knows. So I just always assumed that he just like the gig was up, and when the actual Cylons come, he's to his normal self.
Yeah, by then, but that might have been because the radiation was starting to get to him too.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely could have been it.
So then there's that little thing that looks like, what does that remind me of?
Fire alarm?
Kind of, yeah, like a fire alarm.
Smoke detector, I mean?
Yes. I knew what you meant. Nobody realized that it was there. I noticed it, I think it was Gata that was like, I noticed it like a week ago, but I just thought it had to do with like the museum and the decommissioning. And so then they're like, is there anything else you didn't notice a week ago? Mm-hmm. So they're on the lookout for more sort of Cylon planted things. At this point, when they're talking about the smoke detector thing and talking to Gata, they still haven't informed Gata that the Cylons look like them, right?
Right.
Or have they?
No, I don't know that Gata finds out. Does he? He doesn't find out in this episode, does he? I don't think he finds out till much later, actually. I think, in my memory.
Yeah.
When he has to start working on the Cylon detector with the...
Right.
Yeah.
These notes it's like a Battlestar Galactica wiki says, Baltar explains to Ty he performed discrete tests on everyone in CIC and identified Doral as synthetic.
Which he totally made up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He mentions the device on the Dreadis console. Ty goes to observe the device's removal. Gata apologizes for not informing him of the device, which he noticed a week earlier, presumed to be part of the museum. And then the device is taken over to Baltar for study. Ty orders a search of the ship for any other mystery equipment that, quote, just appeared. So no, I guess they haven't told anyone yet.
Okay. Yeah.
Does Adama... I know I'm asking a lot of dumb questions because I just rewatched this, but it's been a couple of days, and I also watched 33, so I'm trying not to think about stuff from that episode. Uh-huh. Does Adama tell Roslyn that they look like us?
I don't think he tells her right away. I feel like they have a conversation about it. No. Wait. I think that they might discuss it towards the end, maybe, but... I don't know that they actually. I don't. Yeah, I don't think she knows actually. It becomes a topic of some later episodes that come up pretty soon, but I'm not sure that. Yeah, I think it's the second episode when everybody sort of like becomes privy to the knowledge. But right now, I don't think she knows. I think it's just like that really small group, and yeah.
So they discuss, Adama and Rosalind discuss resupplies, and then there's the Astral Queen, which has a bunch of convicts in their like lower deck, and she refuses the captain's suggestion of executing all of them, which Adama, I don't know how he feels about that, but she does ask him if he's going to stage a coup.
Mm-hmm. Flat out.
Yeah. And then he says he's not going to, so she basically takes this as he is recognizing her as president now.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't want to commit to protecting the fleet. He still seems to think that they're in a war. And she's like, the war is over.
Right.
We lost.
Yeah.
You need to understand that.
Right.
There's 50,000 people. We need to find some place to take them. I don't think that this is when she says that maybe this is where she says, if we're going to survive this, we need to start making babies.
Yeah, that's what she says it.
So this is when they do their like really fancy maneuver of having the Battlestar come out of the storm because the Cylons are there, and sort of act as cover so that all of the fleet can come out really quick, just enough out of the storm that they can jump. And then once they jump, then the Battlestar, the Galactica, jumps too.
Again, this was a great, goes to that idea of like, how are we going to play this? Because if they were just in it for themselves, Ty's plan was just to stick our nose out and then jump. But when Adama is like, no, we need to basically run and we're done fighting. That's when he's like, we're going to bring her out 5 clicks. And and you're gonna hear me do like my Adama talk periodically over this, but yeah, they jump out 5 ticks, and they're basically just gonna take hits while the rest of the fleet, while the civilian fleet gets out far enough to jump away, and that's sort of what the Galactica like becomes for a lot of the show. It's a great relation. Yeah, it's a great relationship, like, just from the ships alone, how it exists, and it's just like this, it's a bucket of bolts, and it's really like it's a battle. It's designed to actually take a lot of impact, which we see when it takes a impact of a nuke earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a war horse, and but it establishes that like the relationship between the Galactica and the fleet from there, from the advice of Rosalind. So
this is also where we have the Vipers out fighting, and Lee, his Viper gets some damage, and it looks like he just basically has no power. And Starbuck does this crazy thing where she like flips around and hitches his Viper to hers and crash lands on the Galactica right before they jump, because they won't leave without either of them.
Yeah.
And he was like, leave me. She refused.
Yeah.
So that was this crazy move that she made.
And Adama at that point is not leaving his son again. So
yeah.
No,
oh yeah, and there's earlier they have their reunion, Adama and Lee, where Adama hugs him for a very, very long time, and Lee's just kind of like, what is happening right now? So after all of this, Adama wants to, they're doing their big funeral, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And he, instead of giving one of his normal speeches, starts talking about the legendary 13th colony, Earth, that there were 13 tribes. They left Kobol and scattered around the solar system and established the 12 colonies, but there was a 13th colony that went to this place that is a myth called Earth. And he knows where it is, so we're going to be going to find Earth. Or he knows the sort of vicinity.
Mm-hmm.
Seems, I don't know exactly where it is, but I know where they think it is.
Well, in that moment, he says he knows the location, and that's where they're going. And
right.
Yeah, and it's actually really funny because I remember when I first watched it, I was like, he's totally pulling this out of his ass right now. I didn't, even though I knew that that's what the show was about, obviously. But I was just kind of like, it felt very weird, the delivery of it. And as it turns out, it was.
It was a lie, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when he tells Roslyn that you need to, it's not just enough to survive, you have to have something to live for.
Yeah, which that line hit me right in my heart. Because
what now?
I do have one. It's like it needs to spool up like a jump drive every once in a while.
It hasn't been used for 20 years.
Yeah, but when he said that, because I mean, it's just one of those, it's life lessons, right? And I feel like a lot of us are kind of going through that on this other side of this whatever phase of the last few years have brought us collectively. And it's like, it's not just enough to live anymore. We all have to feel like there's something to live for. It hits hard for me.
It reminds me of my favorite speech of all time from Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, when Samwise talks about how there's good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for.
There's good in this world, Mr. Frodo.
It's my favorite thing my favorite speech ever. And that came out at a similar time to this, where we were in a place where we had been attacked as a country. It was very new for all of us. We all felt very insecure. We were in this war. Everything just felt unsafe, even though looking back, it probably wasn't as unsafe as it felt like it was. But it was a scary time. And when I heard that speech in that movie, it gave me hope. It made me feel like, yes, that's true. There is good in this world. We have to fight for it. We are not terrorists. I feel a little differently now, but it's sort of the same thing in this show, which was created around the same time, but very heavily influenced by the events of 9/11 and the aftermath of all of that. So a speech like that from Adama also just, I watched this not when it aired, but probably a year later. Everything was still fresh. It was like 2004. I still was, at that time, couldn't even look at old pictures of the Twin Towers because it was so upsetting.
I mean, I still can't. So
I have a hard time.
That's
still
where I'm
at
at.
Them. It's true.
I will turn, if video footage ever comes on to this day, I look away, turn it off, whatever. I still have not looked at it since 2001. I
don't mean the attack. I never watch footage of the attack. I mean just like in old movies, you'll see the two towers.
Okay.
And I'm just like, I have a hard time even looking at them when they were okay.
Yeah.
Because it's so upsetting that it's why they're gone. So in 2004, it still felt very, very fresh.
Yeah.
And that speech from Adama also just it gave me a little boost of like, yeah, we can find a way through this. We'll find a way through this, even though we have this guy running our country.
She
He's
said,
that guy.
she said too, she was like, they're going to be so mad at you.
Yeah.
And he was just like, they'll get over it. I thought that was great too. It's just,
True.
it is so like, it's just so like practical. And
Yeah.
they're just kind of like, they're just trying to get through to the next day. And they're just making the best choices they can in the moment. And and it just shows you that like, you know, outside of like moral choices, most of life is just that, right? It's just like things happen and you're just doing the best you can to get to the next day or to the next moment and kind of deal with what you can then. And so I just thought that was great. A really great moment.
The next thing we see is that Adama has a paper in his quarters with a typed statement saying there are only 12 Cylon models. So that's how we learn as an audience that there are 12.
Yeah.
I suppose that means 12 human Cylon models, not counting the Centurions.
Yeah, I mean, I've always interpreted it that way.
Yeah.
I'm fuzzy on who sent that.
Yeah, same.
And I meant to look up. I don't think they ever really like say. And as I was watching it, I was like, who would have sent that to him?
Maybe Baltar.
But
He's the only one who would know.
But would Baltar know?
If Six told him, and we just didn't see it.
Yeah, no, there was never. I don't
that
know.
wouldn't help her at all.
Yeah, I just don't know who would have. And there was a part of me that like thought maybe like the military intelligence, because it was on a official printout dot matrix printer paper, so it felt like it's like maybe that's how he knew. Like I don't know. They never really like go back to that either. It's just kind of established that there are 12 Cylons, and then from then on out, it's at the beginning of the episodes, right? So it's like but in terms of like from within the story,
I think it was like we need the audience to know this. And we'll like retrofit if we need to.
Yeah.
And they just never needed to.
Yeah. It was just sort of like known at that point. We just kept rolling with it.
Yeah. And then we go back to the munition station, and that's when we learn that Doral is a Cylon. And we see a number 6, more of the Doral, and then the Leoben, and then at the end we get Boomer. And that's how the audience learns that Boomer is a secret Cylon.
And even though I'm watching the whole episode, and whenever she's on, I'm like, obviously she's a Cylon, I know that. It gets me every time at the end. When she walks in, I'm always like, oh yeah, you know. It's such a...
What gets me every time is that they didn't want to film all of these people, these 3 or 4 actors, wearing a bunch of different clothes. So all of them are just wearing the same clothes.
Right. They actually talk about how they shot that. I mean, at the time, it was actually the technology that they used was they had to like keep setting up some camera and having them come in, and they were working on a really low budget too. Like you don't. When you actually look at the sets and stuff, you're actually how brilliant it is that they were like how they set the show up so that they can be really low budget but still have it appear to be great. But yeah, I totally noticed that too. All wearing the same clothes. I didn't really.
I understand why they did it. I totally do.
Yeah.
I understand that the technology was limited at the time and it was easier to copy and like paste in.
Yeah.
But I just wish that they were wearing different clothes so it wasn't quite so obvious now.
I mean, if you think about it too, I mean, because there were more Cylon models that weren't even a secret yet. Some of them weren't even introduced until seasons 2 and whatever. And like they like technically could have been there too, but it just, the practicalities of TV and storytelling, I guess they weren't there.
They didn't know they were going to have a Deanna. They didn't know that they were going to have Worthy's character. Like, they didn't know who the other Cylons were yet, so we don't see them.
So I was dating someone once a little while ago, and I was telling her to watch the show, and I remember like she watched the miniseries, and I remember her texting me, "What? Sharon?" She was so shocked and beside herself, and I was like, "Yeah, I know." I was like, "That's what it is. This is what the show is about." And yeah, it was a pretty big. I mean, just because, again, like if you go into the show just being a fan of the old show, like expecting Boomer, who was one of the, the allies to Apollo, to be like the good guys, and just outside of this character Sharon being a Cylon, it was just like, oh wow, they're totally flipping this on us a little bit. So yeah.
I can't wait to talk about when we get to season 3 and we learn about those of our people who are Cylons and how much I can't, oh my God. I was like screaming watching that episode. I was so excited and shocked and like impressed with the show for doing what they did and making it who they made it. It was brilliant. Can't wait to talk about that. Yeah,
I do remember Ron Moore saying we actually went back and made sure that it all made all these people could be who we said they were, and it was good stuff, man. I like, some people don't like it. You're never going to make everybody happy. For the most part, I liked it. There's one character I think we love them so much that it kind of like in a certain way takes away from how they were up to that moment. But when I'm watching this episode and I'm watching that character, and I was just like, in my brain, they are who they are until that moment, and then all of a sudden they become the Cylon after. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I can't wait till we get there.
So before we wrap up, I just want to introduce some little categories we're going to try to stick with on every episode. So the first one is, was Baltar the worst this week?
I mean, to me, no, but
he was not the worst this week. I don't know who is the worst, but we can segue that into the throw them out the airlock category, which is the loser of the episode. I'm gonna vote for Leoben.
Huh. I mean, we didn't really talk. I brought him up a few times, but for me, it's the character Boxy.
Oh, throw the kid out the airlock.
Yeah, okay. Throw the kid out the airlock, and I actually feel like that they basically end up doing that on the show. But it's funny. It was funny to me because it was pretty clear at the outset that they were going to try to use this character in a way, to sort of honor the old show, but it just didn't make sense after a while. And they just were like, yeah, well, let's put him out the airlock. But the fact that he appeared as often as he did, and he was in the sequences at the end when everybody was kind of when they were having their denouement, where they were they go back to the card game and they invite him in to play, and Ties goes to his room and he's drinking again. So it was definitely like they were trying to set him up to be this ongoing character. So I vote to put him out the airlock because he was pretty useless.
In the show Bible, under the character descriptions for different characters, there is this one for Sharon Valeri, and about how bit by bit Sharon will discover clues pointing to her true nature, but instead of pursuing them, she will fight against them on an intuitive level and instead will attempt to form a family with Chief Tyrrell and Boxy, seeking out the one thing she can never be, a maternal role in a human family.
Yeah, and I mean, they you see that, you see that, I mean, there's a couple episodes, now that I brought it up and you watch it again, you're going to see these moments where they are like, we got to do something with this Boxy.
Yeah, I'm glad they dropped it. I never had a problem with what they did later with Athena and Hilo and Hera, because it was more organic.
It was great. I mean, it was like
no pun intended.
It was the that's funny. Yeah, I mean, that relationship again. It's just so. It's so great. Is it? Yeah, the way that it becomes the heart of the show in a lot of ways, and like plot wise and just TV show wise, like we show up we really connect with that family, because that's really what the show's about, really.
So I'm guessing that they saw like, well, you know, we can't. This kid's not going to stay a kid. We're not moving through time as fast as kids grow. Everybody needs to learn from the Walt disaster of Lost and not have these children who grow faster than time moves on the show.
Walt.
So it's good that they sort of sidelined that character, but still kept the idea of a Sharon who wants to have a family, but also added this whole other level of what, how, because no one knew it was possible, not even the Cylons. We'll have so much to talk about when we get there.
Yeah, a lot of people, this like sort of fast forward to the finale, not a plot point, but a lot of people were upset because, you know, even granted, in the opening titles of every episode, you know, it says there are 12 Cylons, blah, 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 and they have a plan. And so a lot of people were interpreting that differently. And for me, we were watching their plan. It wasn't something to be revealed. We were actually watching it happen in real time. And a lot of that plan was to find out what it is to be alive. And that's the question, the very first line that Six says on the...
First line in the whole series.
Yeah, in the whole series. Are you alive? And that's what the plan is.
And that is also why we are not going to rewatch The Plan or ever talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, the plan was that it wasn't a good... I felt like the bits with Simon were actually good, but the other parts weren't good. So, but anyway,
I felt like it derailed all of the goodwill that the show had garnered in order to get it made. It took away from what was established on this show, and I realized I don't need to know their plan. It's okay that I don't know their plan. Their plan is dumb. I would rather not know it. The real Cylons would have come up with something a little more sophisticated than what the humans who wrote that miniseries did. So
yeah, because I mean, again, it was their what they were doing, and again, another reason why I think the show is so great is because it, like, yes, they were the villains of the show, but it was them exploring what it meant, like, you know, existence, reality, like are you alive? What is it to be alive? What is this thing called love? And they were exploring all of that, and they were doing a number of things to explore that, and often the humans were in the way. But again, that's what their plan was. It wasn't like we're building a weapon to destroy the galaxy. That, I think that's what people were kind of thinking, but I never really, personally, never saw or thought that. It just was like, this is their plan. You're watching it every episode. We turned ourselves into humans, and now we're trying to be as human as possible, and we're kind of looking at the humans as our guide and also our adversaries in that quest.
As our guide, but also how can we improve on it?
Exactly. And they make mistakes, and you know. Yeah.
Cylons make as many mistakes as the humans do.
Yeah. But I'm team human, by the way, just in case you're wondering. Not like...
I'm mostly team human.
Yeah.
I go back and forth. There are definitely some weeks where I was team Cylon. Just depends on who and what. But that segues well into this week's favorite Cylon. Do you have a favorite Cylon this week?
I'm gonna say... I'm gonna say 6.
Which 6? Caprica 6
Caprica
or
6. Yeah, Caprica
Okay.
6, I'm going to say. Because I definitely, the scenes that she's in, I was admiring her. I'll just leave it at that.
My favorite Cylon this week is Boomer, and will probably remain Boomer for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. There's some episodes I definitely will say Boomer, but to me, it's just, obviously we know she's a Cylon, but when she's playing as a person knowing that she's a Cylon later, that's when it becomes really interesting to me. But right here, she's, at least in my head, she's Sharon Valeri for most of the episode. Yeah.
She doesn't know anything else.
Yeah.
For a couple episodes anyway.
Yeah.
So next week is when we get into the actual series, with 33, which is the first episode. If listeners are following along, the entire series is on Peacock, but they do this infuriating thing that they also did on Amazon, where the miniseries is separate.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to find Battlestar Galactica and start with Season 1, Episode 1.
Yeah, that I found Battlestar and I started playing and I was like, wait a minute, why are they saying previously? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep. So next week we'll get into the actual series with the very first episode, and I can't wait to talk about it.
Oh yeah, after the miniseries, we were okay. That was pretty good start. What are you going to do now? And again, it set the show up for success all the way through. It told us what it was going to be about. So,
Yeah, and you do not have to wait a year between miniseries and series like everyone else did.
Right.
Not me, but you guys did.
Yeah.
So until then, what do you hear, Diallo?
Nothing but the rain.
Bye.
See ya.